Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I find myself stuck in the middle of two books and a special video I think's going to be a little over an hour long, none of which are ready for release. So today's a good day to focus on some of the common problems I've seen in modern storytelling. This is from the perspective of someone who's spent a lot of time reading. I want to focus on my major story killers, mainly exposition, flashbacks, and tangents. But first, I'm running an art contest. The details are finalized and I'm accepting entries until December 15th of this year. The prize will be one of 3 $200 commissions, and entries will be showcased on the channel as long as they're YouTube friendly. What do you need to enter? Simply draw a pinup, post it with the appropriate hashtag, and @ me on the proper social media sites. Details are in the description, and please help me out by sharing this with any artists you know who may be interested. Thank you. So back to what we were talking about. Over the past 3 years of reviewing books, the common link between the worst stories I've read has been bad exposition. Before we get any further into the topic, let's define the term. We'll use the Google definition: a comprehensive description and explanation of an idea or theory. I like this definition because it's going to make it really easy to make my point. So first off, is exposition a bad thing? No. Exposition is an important tool. It's very hard to have an entertaining story without at least a little exposition. This item does such and such. That's Steve the banker, he's responsible for this and that. Done right, it can introduce important context to a situation, character, or event with little intrusion. Done wrong, well, let's get into some examples. It's videos like this that make me glad I read Shadow of the Conqueror. It's the perfect example of bad exposition. I could, and have, spent an hour discussing the exposition problems of this book, from the endless power testing where the main character Dalen is explaining his process in creating or testing new powers, to the long-winded explanation of how sun-forged items work, to descriptions of unimportant characters' clothes, weapons, and armor. These aren't what I'm going to focus on. If you have the fortitude to slog the first 15 hours of the book, you'll reach the chapter where Dalen is messing with the guts of a skyship. Dalen goes into a multi-page explanation of how the ship stays in the air, how it moves forward, the physics of the 2 magic stones that make it fly, and just in case you had any remaining interest in this screed, he breaks out the equations. If you're anything like me, nothing gets you more revved up for a story's climax like a 15-minute math lecture. The biggest problem with this small textbook of exposition shoved in our faces is we're coming to the climax of the book. And I say climax with quotation marks. This is supposed to be where the action is taking over. This is not the place for Professor Dalen to break out The Fundamentals of Magic Rocks Volume 4. I really don't want these rants to become me ragging on Shad, so let's use another example. The worst book I've been subjected to, by far, is A Handbook for Mortals. Without giving myself Vietnam-style flashbacks, let me tell you a bit about the story. A valley girl with a southern accent moves to the big city where she joins a magic show and crushes on all the hunky boys that work there. Name drop, name drop, name drop. The catch is she's an actual witch. So far so standard for forgettable modern fiction. But what makes this book my most hated is not the forced love triangle between the exchangeable love interests A and B. It's not the fever dream magic scenes. It's not even the endless name dropping of people everyone forgot about 6 months before the book was published. The biggest problem is the never-ending, ever-present, book-stuffing exposition. There are whole chapters of the book where nothing seems to happen and the main character does nothing but explain stuff not even going on in the story for 30 minutes. I'm not kidding. This book would be thinner than a novella if you took out all the non-essential exposition. It's endless, rambling nonsense that reads like a late-night special on early 2000s late-night television. It never stops. Near the end of the book, there's a large section where the main character is near death and unconscious, and is somehow rambling exposition at us. She's the POV character. She's not even conscious, and she's still cramming exposition down our throats with a tamping rod. I was hoping against hope the main character would just die and end the story. To summarize, exposition becomes harmful when it's too much. We've all heard the expression, show don't tell. Well, this is why. Exposition is a good way to give a brief explanation of the uninteresting. But too much is like listening to someone else explain the weird dream they had last night. The only person interested is the person telling the story. Moving on. I hate flashbacks. I say that with no apology, and I don't believe I'm alone. There are few things worse than breaking from the story to tell a different story. If you've read any books on writing, you've probably heard it said the first sentence should catch the reader's attention. Well, this is true for the beginning of any story. One of the hardest aspects of storytelling is the beginning, because you have to capture someone's attention. A flashback also has this problem, but has the additional problem of pulling you from a story you've already invested in. I've said before that a story is a continuous dream. This is something I'm paraphrasing from John Gardner's own book on writing, something I'll be releasing a video on soon. He's right, at least in this. The best stories are those we forget we're reading, the ones that make you lose track of time, forget where you are, or that you even are. The vivid, continuous dream. It's one of the things that makes long-form writing so hard. Let's use an example I'm sure will have the broadest appeal. I'm not going to use a book for this, though you might argue I am. The anime One Piece has a stupid pacing problem. To be fair, most shonen anime have a similar problem, at least if you go back far enough. You reach an exciting battle, the first blow is about to be struck, and now it's time for a multi-episode flashback to the villain's origin, or more context on the main character's past, or an explanation of how things got to where they are. I've often thought this is a crime worthy of jail time, or at least a public beating. I've just been mugged, and they stole my story. So why use an anime in a conversation about books? Well, we are the media we consume, and it's impossible to read modern literature and not see the influence of anime and video games. I'm not saying this influence is a bad thing, or it should be avoided. The mark is indelible. These products are a major part of culture and will forever mark the literature of this period. The trick will be learning what we can take and what we should avoid as storytellers. So let's move on to tangents. I debated on calling this section world building, and still might. Unlike flashbacks, let's cover what a tangent is. This time we'll go with definition 2, because unlike Shad, we know to leave the math out of literature. A completely different line of thought or action. To paraphrase, a branching path that starts with the main story, but doesn't affect or serve the main story. This is one I'm sad to say I'm guilty of. As writers, it can be hard to know when something is unneeded. The term "kill your darlings" is going to pop up for this one. When you write, there will be whole scenes, chapters, and storylines that you'll have to abandon because they don't serve the plot in any way. To use another anime term, this stuff is filler. Let's use a sort of example. In the book The Name of the Wind, our main character Quoth, which I know I'm pronouncing wrong, is being hounded to tell his story to a chronicler. Quoth agrees, but gives the man the stipulation that he cannot interrupt him and must record the story exactly as he tells it. This includes if parts don't make sense or seem unrelated. This is a tall ask. Quoth does a lot of stuff in these books. A friend of mine is a big fan of the series and has complained numerous times about the lack of a third and final book. He needs to know how all the things Quoth has done will pay off. He's speculated that the author has written himself into a corner, that Quoth has come so far and done so much it's impossible to have a satisfying payoff, that the book was a power fantasy written beautiful. Having read the first book, I can see how that may be the issue. Quoth is an overpowered character. I did enjoy the book. It's well written and worth your time if for nothing else than the enjoyment of the story. But that comes with a caveat that you may never get the payoff, and that's the problem. So how is this an example? Well, everything Quoth does fills out the world and its lore, and everything he does creates a new thread, a new storyline that if not connected at the end becomes loose, or a tangent. In a recent review, I complained about missing out on a story's payoff. How I felt like I was watching the end of the second act with no conclusion. I've always said the best stories end. Well, that end can only ever be equal to or less than its build-up. Loose threads or tangents take away from the end. They create a setup with no ultimate payoff, and ultimately take away from the story. To put another way, how do you make a child cry? First you give him a piece of candy, and then you take it away. If you'd never given the child candy in the first place, he'd have nothing to cry about. This comes back to killing your darlings. As writers, we've all had those scenes we've had to cut, things that took us days of writing, planning, and tweaking to get right. We tell ourselves, this shows the character's true compassion, or this shows things have come back to normal and all is well. But often, it's just fluff, and it's probably better off cut. But a personal word to the writers and the darlings we kill. Never throw them away. Just set them aside. It simply may not be that darling's time yet. Then there's the other tangents. Those that are nothing more than the author preaching at us. You see this in a lot of modern TV shows, and heck, even those going back 20 years. Back in the 90s, there was a show I absolutely loved named Titus. I maintain that it's still one of the funniest shows ever. Stacy Keach is a national treasure as Papa Titus, and the show hits close to my own upbringing. That doesn't mean it doesn't have flaws. Mostly the show is about coming from a broken home and how the trauma of the main character's life causes him to sabotage his own happiness. A fairly common comedy trope. There are a few episodes that don't focus on this theme. The most prominent of these is probably the episode where Tommy, the main character's best friend, finds out that his father is gay. The episode is still very funny and plays off the continuing theme that Tommy is just a bit too effeminate, but it ultimately gets preachy with the climax of the episode being Tommy standing up to a bunch of bigoted rednecks with the sharp end of a pool cue. A more tortured stereotype I can't imagine. This was an ultimately unnecessary tangent because it turns out Tommy isn't upset that his father is gay. He's upset about how this has hurt his mother and broken their family. A far more touching problem, and one whose seriousness is hurt by the needless grandstanding. There was the possibility for a complex and interesting ending to the episode, but someone on the team had to get a shot in at their favorite punching bag, and made something, at least by current standards, cringy. I'm not telling you to sterilize your stories of politics, opinions, or explanations. That's an impossibility. Nor am I telling you to not explore everything your world has to offer. My point is, your finished product should be doing the most it can with as little as it needs. And with that, I wish you all good luck.